Gators Breakdown episode 79 is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Fall camp happens this week, starts this week. And to break that down, bring in Thomas Goldkamp of 24/7 Sports, GatorBait.net. Thomas, thank you for joining me here on Gators Breakdown. I think we have plenty to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Look forward to it. Thanks for having me back on again.
For sure. Yeah, you joined us in the spring, and I think probably the most comprehensive breakdown we had of each position there. So yeah, we'll do something similar tonight. We won't go that in depth with it, but what you guys been working on lately at 24/7, and what's coming up with camp starting?
Well, obviously today Florida had their big media day, so we've kind of moved past the SEC media day stage and into players reporting for camp today, and obviously they'll start practice tomorrow. So they're going to do some split squad stuff, and as you guys know, we'll have plenty of coverage on GatorBait.net. You get your full fix. Be sure to check us out.
For sure. Best site out there for Gators coverage. So by all means, Tommy, shall I have any deals coming up for listeners out there if they're not already a part of 24/7?
Yeah, I believe right now we're actually running a promotion where even for existing subscribers, if you sign up and extend your membership, you can get 3 months free. If you're a new user, you can get 3 months free as well. So there's no better time to do it, really. I mean, this will get you through most of the season, and you'll have a chance to check out all of our fall camp coverage, which I would say is probably the best out there.
I would definitely agree with that. Give Thomas, Blake, and Luke out there a follow on GatorBait.net, and keep up with those guys on the Alligator Alley message board there too. Before we dive in here, guys, remember you can find all your Gators Breakdown episodes on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. Just search on those sites or get the links by following Gators Breakdown on Twitter and on Facebook at Gators Breakdown. And while you're there on iTunes, please leave a review, rate the show, let Gator Nation out there know what you're getting with Gators Breakdown. Thomas, we mentioned Gators had their media day today. Jim McElwain, of course, took the podium and took many questions there, but the one thing I took away from Jim McElwain, and I think the word that I really took away, was competition. He really feels this roster is close to, to molding in his eyes and what he's trying to bring to the University of Florida. And competition was the word he used over and over again. Did it seem that he might have the roster close to where he wants it, at least on the offensive side of the ball? And it's really the offensive line and the quarterbacks. He really talked about finally having competition at those positions.
Yeah, I think there's two ways to look at it. One, you can have competition by necessity when you lose guys and there's a lot of turnover. And I think that's probably a little bit more the case on the defensive side of the ball. There's a lot of young guys that are going to have a chance to play just because there's no older guys in front of them anymore. So that's one way to look at it. But I think, like you said, I think the offensive side of the ball, that's where you're really seeing the good competition, because you've got a line, an offensive line that returns just about everybody, and yet they're still being pushed for their spots. Same thing at receiver. You've got guys that have been there, have played, and are still getting pushed because there's talented freshmen behind them now. So I think that Florida is definitely getting to a place, on the roster where the balance is there. I think you'd still like to see a little bit more on the defensive side, but we're going to find out pretty quickly this year. Maybe they do have some younger guys that are ready to step up, and that's the kind of competition he's talking about.
For sure. Thomas, of course, the biggest monkey in the room, elephant in the room, whatever you have it, is, of course, the quarterback position. Everybody talked about how Malik Zaire is, a bubbly personality, and the coaches have mentioned it too. And there was a report yesterday that came out, the coaches were really high on Franks in the offseason, going out from ESPN, I believe. So, going into fall camp, is this going to be, I don't think it really matters who takes snap one in practice one that we see. Do you think, splitting the reps may hurt the growth of the offense a little bit, where it was from under Franks in the spring, is installing, design runs that we'll probably see with Malik Zaire, and with it, for the rest of the offense, does it change anything for what they do to the offensive line, blocking schemes, receivers? How much would they run Malik Zaire and design runs? We saw Bama be able to incorporate it with not much of a problem. If Malik Zaire does win the job, and what we see throughout fall camp, is it going to hurt this offense's growth at all, trying to get an offense built around him?
I understand that argument, and I understand especially the hesitation from some fans who view it as, another kind of Band-Aid situation rather than building around Franks, the guy that you've recruited, has all the tools. I don't really see it like that. I think that Florida, is in a place where they feel that they have all the pieces around the quarterback to win. And having said that, they feel like they need a quarterback who can come in and manage. And I think that's the biggest reason why Zaire is the favorite to start, because he's been in a situation where he's played against good college teams. He's played against LSU. He's played against Texas. He's done well. He understands all that kind of stuff. And then you add the personality aspect. Just watching him today, it's very rare that I feel with players like, okay, I get why everybody likes this guy. It was immediately clear with Zaire. I mean, talking to him, the guy's all smiles. Everybody around him, the players seem to enjoy him. He's just one of those guys that has that factor about him where you really like the guy. And so I think that is going to be a very important thing for Florida's offense because, again, they have the pieces. Now it's a question of how do you get them, into use in the best possible way. And I think Zaire is really going to be able to help them do that.
Yeah, for sure. Thomas, a question that I've been asked a lot, especially lately in the last week or so, is does Malik Zaire, is he the starter the entire season? I think most people do see when Florida goes to Dallas and takes on Michigan with his experience, that's probably what the Florida coaches want when they brought him in, an experienced quarterback to take on the road against Dallas. If you had to make a prediction or just your thought, would you see Malik Zaire, barring injury, would you see him starting all 12 games of the season?
No, I'm not ready to say that yet. And the reason is I think that, because of the reasoning for Zaire likely being the starter in game one, the experience, I think that makes him a heavy favorite there. But once you get into the season, you don't know what's going to happen. If Florida comes out and for whatever reason struggles against Michigan and say they lose that game, well, suddenly the confidence factor around the whole team can get shaken, and you just don't know. I don't think that the talent gap between Zaire and Franks is so big that it's a foregone conclusion that he's the starter all year. And I think that's why some people are even a little bit hesitant. Why are we bringing in this guy? Is he really that much better than Franks? But it's the experience factor. And so I see that as, I thought Jim McElwain actually had an interesting comment today when he was talking about Zaire. Said, well, we brought him in to win a game. And then he went on to say, in a bunch of games. But I thought that was kind of telling into maybe the mindset of, okay, let's go ahead and win this first one. And then once you do that, then you have some confidence. The team kind of believes in itself a little bit more, and you go from there. But I don't view it as a situation where Malik Zaire is the guy all 12 games and there's no chance anyone else gets on the field.
Yeah. One more question about the quarterback, because I just thought about this one as we go along. Would you see – you mentioned you think the talent gap is not that big between Zaire and Franks. You think we see Franks – if Zaire starts, do you think we see him with maybe some forced snaps from the coaching staff against Michigan?
I don't know. I don't like doing that.
Yeah.
Because it brings the rhythm into play and all that. I think what you're more likely to see is, Zaire goes the distance against Michigan, barring an injury, and then you start to get Frank some real game reps against a team like Northern Colorado, right, where there's really not a whole lot of pressure, but it still gets him into some live situations. You get some tape of him against opposing teams, things that he hasn't seen maybe, and then you can kind of go from there and, feel out that quarterback battle as you continue to move into the season.
For sure. All right, let's move on to running backs. How do you see time split? But I think we know what we're getting in Scarlett and Pirine. What do you think happens behind those guys? We know Thompson and his fumbling issues, and now you have Malik Davis and Darius Lemons coming in, guys that many think that can come in as freshmen and take some carries away from Thompson. Scarlett, Pirine 1 and 2, but what happens behind those guys?
Well, I think they really would like Mark Thompson to emerge as kind of, that guy that can push Pirine and really those two split snaps. I just personally have my doubts. Like you said, we've seen the fumbling issues. Thompson has proven to have a couple issues off the field. So I just don't know that the coaches feel at this point that they can trust him with that level of, responsibility right now. And so I actually think that what you may end up seeing is Scarlett being the obvious number one, Pirine backing him up. And then that third spot, I could see one of those freshmen, if they come in and play well, even passing Mark Thompson on the depth chart. So I think that, they love Thompson's ability. They love his potential. It's the main reason he's gotten so many carries despite these issues. But at a certain point, you either break through or you don't. And I think he's pretty close to reaching that point right now where he's either going to get past or he's going to get it together and make his push.
We'll move on to tight ends right now. DeAndre Goolsby, Deontay Lewis, 1 and 2, those guys have solidified, their roles a little bit. But if those guys don't improve on pretty much what we saw last year, where Goolsby can't pick up a block and Deontay Lewis can't be counted on to convert a key third down or a big drop. Can Kamori Gamble see some snaps as a freshman coming in with his size and athleticism, maybe even be a red zone target?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he obviously can catch the ball. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. With those freshmen, a lot of times they haven't blocked in high school a whole lot, and so that's a little bit of an issue. But I thought he looked pretty good doing that in the spring. So I think we'll see him push probably. That tight end is a group that I've been probably a little lower on than most, just because the expectations for that group were so high last year.
Mm-hmm.
People talking about Goolsby and Lewis just being these mismatch nightmares, and you look at what they did in McElwain's first season. I think both of those guys averaged like 17, 18 yards a catch. And then, you lose Jake McGee as the close in guy, and they only seem to be catching 3 to 5 yard passes last year. So it's gonna be interesting to me to see if they can kind of come back to the mean a little bit to what they were doing earlier on in McElwain's tenure, or if a guy like Gamble just proves to be better and can beat him out. But I think that the pieces are there to be very good. If that group doesn't take a step forward, then I would have some concerns about the coaching, most likely.
For sure. Thomas, a position that's gotten a lot of preseason love is the wide receivers. A lot of preseason magazines, SEC media days. A lot of when there was a lot of previews there going on with those guys. And of course, starts with Antonio Callaway, and a lot of people think Tyree Cleveland, Josh Hammond, Freddie Swain can be guys that come along nicely. Even a lot of people are even saying this is the best wide receiver group in the SEC. Can anyone? I think what we really need to see from besides Callaway is consistency. Can anyone besides Callaway be consistent? I mentioned the names, but you also now bring in Dre Massey, who will be healthy. Brandon Powell, who's been, I guess, somewhat consistent, as in, every 2 or 3 games he, probably have 5 or 6, 7 catches, where he seems to be the favorite, underneath guy for these quarterbacks. But besides Callaway, can these guys be consistent enough to be considered one of the SEC's best?
I think so, and the reason is kind of what McElwain was pointing to throughout the day today. There's just too many guys that are talented enough to have that breakthrough where you're not going to get at least 1 or 2 of them actually making the step. I mean, I think there's just so many guys that can do it at this point. Some of them are going to emerge. Dre Massey was obviously a guy last year that they thought was going to be the guy at receiver, to go along with Callaway, and, he gets hurt on the first kickoff of the season. He should be back healthy. I thought he looked terrific in the spring. He's probably the number 1 guy I keep my eye on. But, Tyree Cleveland is a guy that, to me, he looked a lot bigger physically today. And I think that's an area you'd like to see the group improve as a whole. I think he could have a really big year. Joshua Hammond's another guy that doesn't get any love, really, when you're talking about the Masseys and the Clevelands and the Callaways. I really like what he can do. Is he going to be a game breaker type? Maybe not. But I think he's a guy that has very consistent hands, seems to always be in the right spot, knows where to be. I think that there are just so many guys in this group that Florida's going to be able to have 4 or 5 that can count on every game. And, if that offensive line takes a step forward, suddenly your quarterback's got more time. Those guys have more chances to get open and create mismatches. And, I can understand the hype from the Florida players and the coaches with them thinking this is going to be a big step forward for them on offense.
And Thomas, with those names you just discussed, and, I brought up as well, one name McElwain brought up in his presser today was Kadarius Toney. A lot of people thought maybe with all the quarterbacks that, and with Massey in, that he could be a redshirt candidate. But McElwain made it sound like he's going to definitely get some playing time this fall.
Yeah, I think he's going to play. I think we saw what he did in the spring game. Obviously, he was playing quarterback, but he's just a different guy when he has the ball in his hands. And that was one of the things about watching Urban Meyer's teams. Almost 10 years ago now, he had guys that as soon as they touched the ball, you just had the sense that something was going to happen. And Kadarius Toney is one of those guys. He has that ability to really get to full speed and then cut without losing speed. And I think that's something not a lot of guys have. You throw in the fact that he has played quarterback and throw the football. You make defenses prepare for a lot of different things when you have a guy like that on the field, especially when you got other guys like Antonio Callaway and Tyree Cleveland out there to also give him headaches. So I don't think there's any question Tony's going to play this fall. How much, I think, probably remains to be seen, but he will have an impact this fall.
I think a little bit of his impact was maybe dampened a little bit with Zaire coming in, because I think maybe he would have been the quarterback that would have taken over for Franks, to in the red zone for some red zone runs and, just maybe third down conversions or just the change of pace quarterback.
Yeah, I don't even necessarily see him as a quarterback, though. I think, we get stuck on those labels, but I really see him more as a gadget type player, a guy that you can bring in and line up next to the quarterback and then potentially directly snap it to him, or or snap it to the quarterback and have him, flare out into the flats or whatever. I think you can do a lot of different things with him without necessarily pulling Malik Zaire out of the game. So I don't know how much Zaire coming in, and maybe it takes a snap or two away from him. But I don't necessarily view Toney as a guy that, is lining up under center, taking a shotgun snap all the time. He's going to be a guy they play in the slot. They play a running back. They do a lot of different things with him.
Gotcha there. Moving on to the offensive line, we know Martez Ivey is now moving out to tackle. I had Cole Kublik on earlier this week, and he said he's not really sold on Ivey being, worth the hype just yet at tackle, because he's seen some bad tendencies there, and we know from high school he come from a run-heavy offense where he did play tackle. Looked good against South Carolina when he had to fill in for that area, but is he a bookend left tackle Florida can count on at this moment from what we saw from the spring and now maybe workouts leading up to fall?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you mentioned it. He's probably a little bit raw at that position, hasn't really played it since high school, and even then, wasn't really asked to pass block a whole lot. But you look at the size and the athletic ability there. I mean, it's hard to go wrong with a guy like that. Maybe you take some lumps here and there with assignment wise. But one of the things talking to Florida players today, I forget exactly which player it was, but they made the point that the offensive line this year is just not thinking as much. And I think I made the point even in the spring when we were talking about Brad Davis, that I think one of the issues with Mike Summers was his coaching style was very technique oriented, hand placement, landmarks with the feet, that kind of thing, and assignment football. And so guys were thinking too much. And the player that I was talking to today, and I wish I could remember who it was, one of the offensive players, said basically these guys aren't thinking as much anymore. They're just going out and playing. And I think that'll help a guy like Ivey in particular, who is still learning the game. Those guys that are still picking up different things and learning tend to think about the technique a lot rather than just playing. And so I think if Ivey's unleashed kind of in his natural position more to just go out and be a road grader, I'm pretty high on his potential.
You think Jordan or Heggie at left guard to start camp, and how do you think it ends before going into Michigan?
I feel pretty good of the three guys, that are battling for those guard spots, Jordan, Johnson, and Heggie. I really like Heggie. I think he's just got that main streak that the coaching staff is looking for, and obviously he has the size and anchor ability to really be a force in there. He would be the one that I would think would have a real good shot to go in and win a job. I really think the battle's going to be on the other side at right guard between Jordan and Johnson, but we'll see how that plays out.
Gotcha. Moving on defensive end, Zuniga, CC, Kavanis Davis, Antonius Clayton. What can these guys do in fall camp to prove Florida can find an elite pass rusher? These guys I think have potential. Sherritt, you can throw his name in there, but it's kind of more of the edge run setter there. Zuniga came on the scene last year. Many are pegging Antonius Clayton to maybe do the same this year. Is this one where Florida can find another Dante Fowler, Alex McAllister, where they can just count on the guy to get to the quarterback?
I don't know that they'll have a Dante Fowler. I think that, the overall depth of that unit is going to be so good that, they're going to be able to roll guys and keep those ends especially really fresh. Antonius Clayton's a guy I think could have a very big year. We were talking to him today, and he was telling us, he went from 220 when he arrived, had an illness before his freshman season that really kind of sapped his weight, and he just had to add weight so quickly that he went from 220 to 260. And had no conditioning at that point because he just wasn't used to playing at that weight. His muscles weren't ready for it. He said that, he would play 5 plays and felt like he played a whole game. Well, he's kind of gone through the whole process of leaning that weight down, and now he's 260, looks 260. I mean, the guy looks really good. I think he's one that you could keep an eye on having a real breakout season. He certainly feels like he's headed towards that. CeCe Jefferson, if he's able to stay on the outside a little more frequently, obviously has some potential there. I actually think he looks a little leaner even than maybe you'd want him to be. He's in the 250 range right now, but maybe they use him in some different ways as a speed rusher. You talked about it, Sherritt, Zuniga, Davis. I mean, there's just so many names there. It's almost like the receiver position. I feel like there's just too many guys for you not to be productive at that position.
Right. Yeah. Hopefully, one of those guys are finally a guy they can count on there. Defensive tackle, Ivy, Brantley's gone. You got Clark coming in, Taven Bryan as well, taking over for those guys. How big of a drop off do you think there may be with those guys?
Well, I don't think the drop off is going to be huge in terms of the starters. I don't think that Clark and Bryan are going to be Brantley and Ivy. But having said that, I think that those guys are guys that have played a lot of football. They know what they're looking at. Kerry Clark, Randy Shannon made the point today that Clark has really done a good job of maintaining his weight this offseason and really kind of, leaning down a little bit so his conditioning is much better. I think that they know they're going to need, those two starting defensive tackles to probably play a few more snaps than they're used to. But the depth behind them is really where you get concerned. Looking at mostly freshmen, hopefully a guy like Ja'Kai Polite can take a step forward. I think the biggest issue there would be if you have an injury to one of those two starters, then suddenly you're into a place where guys that maybe aren't as physically developed as they need to be are having to be counted on.
For sure. Thomas Goldkamp for 24/7 Sports, GatorBait.net, joining us here on Gators Breakdown. A few more questions about the defense, and then we'll move on to some other things here. Can these young linebackers, can they learn from their mistakes last year? Gap integrity wasn't the best. You go back and look at the first half of the LSU game, and Darius guys kind of went crazy, and we know about Dalvin Cook and, of course, Scarborough and those Bama running backs there. But who's going to emerge behind Reese, Sean Joseph, Colin Johnson, Jeremiah Moon? Those are the seem to be the four set guys there. But what happens with those guys, given that Florida might be playing three linebackers a good bit of the season this year?
Well, I think they're going to need guys to step up. And you look at it, the freshmen they brought in some talented guys, but, James Houston is coming off a big knee injury. Some of those other guys, Nick Smith will be out a couple weeks with a knee injury. So there's really not a whole lot of depth. You can look at, the secondary, which we haven't gotten to yet. But at least in the secondary, there's a lot of bodies. I don't know that you have that at linebacker. And so it's going to be really, really important, not only for those four that you mentioned to stay healthy, but for them to be productive, because that's one position that you talk about, that competition. I'm not sure it's quite going to be there this fall, just from a health standpoint and guys still coming along. So I think that's a position more than probably any other on the team that Florida's got to stay healthy. And it's one that I don't feel super comfortable about beyond those top couple guys you mentioned.
Thomas, Jim McElwain mentioned in his press conference, we know about the Marcel Harris injury. A lot of people assumed Chauncey Gardner was going to move back to safety. Jim McElwain said they're going to start fall camp with Chauncey Gardner at cornerback. So how much of a surprise was that? Do we see it staying that way? And is that any indication of the confidence level of the freshman coming in?
No, I think, maybe it's a little surprising. I probably would have expected Gardner to move back because I feel like his speed and range is something that you can really take advantage of at free safety. Now, having said that, I think, it's funny, I just wrote an article on this right before coming on with you about why they're doing it. And essentially, Randy Shannon is of the mindset, he's not looking at cornerback versus safety in terms of what a guy plays. He's looking at getting the four best defensive backs on the field. And so what that tells me is they really like Jawan Taylor at safety. He's a guy that played a good bit for them last year, has a ton of upside, very rangy guy, can really run and hit. And so I think being able to leave Gardner at cornerback, what you're able to do is get that four on the field, get them some snaps together and get comfortable. And if that ends up being your best unit, then great. If not, and what ends up happening is a freshman steps up at cornerback and shows he's ready to play outside from day one, then suddenly you have the flexibility to move Gardner back to safety if maybe he's better than Taylor. But I think going into fall camp, what they wanted to do is make sure that they have the best four on the field, get them as many snaps as they can together, and then you can move around pieces at a later date if guys start stepping up.
Gotcha. Thomas, the GatorBait.net faithful, they definitely want to know, why are you sleeping on Joseph Putu?
It's funny, Shannon actually mentioned him today as one of the guys that they, he was kind of going through the list of guys they could replace Marcel Harris with. And Putu was actually one of the guys he mentioned, but, not ready to go that route just yet. So we'll see. He's a guy that obviously has the size, and it's a big step up to SEC football. So we'll see. Now that he's got a year under his belt, maybe he'll wake us up a little bit.
For sure. Thomas, we know we're getting in Eddie Pinheiro and Johnny Townsend there, but returning kicks, is going to be open competition. As far I know, we probably know we can pick a few names out there, but is it really that important at this point right now?
Well, I think the more important thing is that you've got a lot of options now. And one of the things I thought happened during Will Muschamp's tenure was he started off with a lot of really explosive guys. Urban Meyer recruited the fastest team in America, and you had Will Muschamp walked into a roster with Jeff Demps and Chris Rainey and Solomon Patton and Andre DeBose, guys where you were always going to have a good return guy. Towards the end of his tenure, it was getting pretty rough where you didn't know who that was going to be. I think Florida's back into a place at receiver, especially now, and some of these guys in the secondary where you've got athletes like Chauncey Gardner or Christopher Henderson or, some of the receivers they have, Tyree Cleveland, Dre Massey. I think that Florida will be just fine. Who those guys are, who they decide to go with, not entirely sure now. That's what they'll kind of suss out in camp. But I really, Jim McElwain has made the point that Florida's speed is back, and I'm inclined to believe him on that point. I think Florida's got a lot of athletes, and that's when you start to see, those explosive plays happening on special teams.
For sure, for sure. Thomas, a question from the GatorBait.net message boards here from Strike Up the Band. Do you think Randy Shannon runs more zone than man? Do you think it will tilt one way or the other if the young secondary exceeds expectations?
I think that they are going to run a lot of man. Randy Shannon's defense is essentially and he explained this a little bit today, he wants to keep it simple. I mean, he basically wants to line up athletes against your athletes and let them go cover, let them go rush the passer. Florida will do some things like a nickel blitz here and there. But schematically, it's going to be pretty simple, which means a lot of man-to-man when you can handle that. I would expect, probably a similar mix, maybe not a ton more than under Jeff Collins, but that's certainly going to be something that they do. And they're going to rely on guys like Kylan Johnson, playing that strong side linebacker role to be able to stick with tight ends in coverage and do some different things so that they, really are able to get their best 11 on the field and then just go fly around.
Definitely it'll be fun to see how Randy Shannon incorporates his fingerprint on this defense. I'm ready to see it. A lot of people don't think they'll miss a beat from Jeff Collins to Randy Shannon, and given his history at Miami and Arkansas recently, and now back at Florida, and I think people really got excited with what they saw in the Iowa games, in the bowl games. So I think that was one thing to point to where fans started, kind of really getting excited about what they might see from Randy Shannon.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that because Shannon brought up that bowl game today, and you talk about fans being excited about what they saw. Well, Randy Shannon actually said, "Hey, look, don't expect us to call the defense the way we did in that game. The personnel's not the same,
right?"
And, so some fans might be a little bummed to hear that, but he was just making the point: you got to play to your strengths, and until they find out exactly what that is, don't get too hyped about that bowl game just yet.
A couple questions from the YouTube live chat we have going on here. Carl Johnson wants to know, what was the mentality and the confidence level of the team as a whole today at Media Day?
I thought it was really good. It was funny. I got to the end and, I had gone through talking to, Jordan Scarlett and Tyree Cleveland. Tyree Cleveland was telling me the offense was going to be legendary if it clicks like it's supposed to. And, those guys felt really good. I got to Voshon Joseph, and he was really funny. He was just kind of one of those bubbly personalities that you could tell he was just having a good time, ready to go. And I told him, I was like, man, all right, you guys are extremely confident and loose. And you guys are always like that on media day. But this feels a little different. And I asked him why, and he goes, doubters, man. He's like, y'all are doubting, y'all don't have any idea what we got up our sleeve for this season. And that's the kind of the enthusiasm that I think is energetic, especially when you got a guy that can hit like that. This Florida team feels like it's having fun. They really do. A lot of teams this time of year, you hear them talking about how they're such a family and all that. A lot of times I write that off. I actually do think that Florida's in a really good place right now. Now, where it goes from here, the adversity doesn't really start till you lose a game. So we'll see. But I think they're in a very, very good place mentally right now.
Yeah, it does seem that way. And Jim McElwain as well. We've mentioned how he mentioned competition and iron sharpens iron. So, a lot of people believe in that term, but, with the way Jim McElwain, he was kind of a quiet confidence at SEC Media Days, at Florida's own Media Day. And you mentioned the players as well, maybe, of course, we can't go by that. It's, more than likely not going to point to, the final record. But you do get a sense that maybe what they've seen through spring, off-season workouts and going into the season.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, that's the whole point that McElwain's made since he's been here. It's all about preparation. And they obviously feel pretty good about how they prepared through the summer. And, I think that they've got some of the pieces in place to do it. It's just a matter of getting it all to click and, finding ways to work around the places that maybe aren't quite up to snuff going into 2017.
For sure. Thomas Goldkamp of 24/7 sportsgatorbait.net joining us here on Gators Breakdown. Thomas, you going into the season now, you guys gave your season predictions for the Gators, and you had the Gators going 9-3, and some high scoring offense. You have the Gators scoring about 34.6 points per game and giving up 22.3 points per game on the defensive side of the ball. What do you attribute the big jump on offense to? Do you think the quarterback situation gets figured out and it leads Florida to a 9-3 record?
Well, I think the biggest thing is, we didn't really do the math in our heads as we were picking the games. We just kind of picked them one at a time. And, it was funny. I actually looked at mine at the end and I was like, wow, man, I got them scoring a lot in a lot of games. And I averaged it up. And I think for my picks, it was like 37 points a game or something like that, which would be really, really high. That would have been like 22nd in the country last year. So, I'm maybe a little bit high there, but no, I frankly just think this offense has too many pieces not to improve significantly. We've said that probably a couple times over the last few years. Everybody's always waited for that offensive line to take the next step. But I really like Florida's skill positions. The quarterback obviously is still a question mark. But what they've got at running back in terms of depth and, talent, and then at receiver as well, I don't see how you can't be productive with that. The line, even if it's just serviceable, I think you have the pieces in place to really let guys just go to work. And so I think that you're going to see some of that. And I think that Jim McElwain has built it to a point where he knows he can do some of that. And then once you're able to do that and build some confidence, you're able to get a little more creative. Guys start to feel themselves a little bit. And I think that's when things can kind of start to turn around and then really take off.
Speaking on that, Thomas, how big is this Michigan game in your opinion? Since we've kind of been in the media lately, this is Florida's biggest opener maybe ever, definitely in recent history. Going to Dallas against Jim Harbaugh, two coaches that came in the same year. People want to compare them now, and people put Jim Harbaugh above Jim McElwain. How big is this game for Jim McElwain? How big is this game for the Gators when the season kicks off 3:30 the first week of September?
I think it's huge. There's no question about it. Florida hadn't played outside the state for a season opener in 38 years. So it's going to be a huge build-up to this game nationally, I think, within the fan bases themselves. And then I think there's this interesting dynamic too, where I think a lot of the recruiting concerns about Jim McElwain have cooled off after the last week or two. Obviously they're on a tear. But look, they've existed. Those concerns have been there for the last 2 years. I think both casual fans and diehard fans have seen them. And so when you're playing a team like Jim Harbaugh's, who's recruited at that level that maybe Florida expects to, and he's losing 18 starters, it's easy to, as a fan, talk yourself into, oh, we should win. And then conversely, if we can't, well, it's a recruiting issue. And so that's when I think, if Florida's not able to win that game, the narrative pretty quickly can shift on you to where things get pretty negative about Jim McElwain, things get pretty negative about the program. Yeah, it's just one game, but you really, really don't want to start a season with that sour taste in your mouth, given, all the kind of storylines that are going into it. The fact that, Florida's trying to become a more physical team. And the last time they played Michigan came out and really bullied them around. Florida's whole, thing this offseason has been, okay, we need to pay them back for that. We need to be the team that can push them around. So, yeah, this is a big, big game. Florida really, I think, has to win this game. And if they don't, I think all bets are off as far as where they go. If they do, I think the sky's the limit for this team. I think they're just going to gain so much confidence. And I think that it's just going to be a kind of a snowball type effect one way or the other for this Florida team.
Thomas, we had a podcast about a month ago on this subject, and it was pretty popular on the board as well. May get you to think a little bit here, but what's more important for the Gators in 2017, to win the SEC East again or beat Florida State?
I think beat Florida State. I think that's a really tricky question, because if you win the SEC East, you probably had a very good season, right. Especially with the teams that Florida's playing out of the West this year, LSU and Texas A&M. On the flip side, I think beating Florida State helps you start to turn the tide in that recruiting battle for good, or at least get very competitive in it on a consistent basis. Fans don't like to lose to rivals. One of the reasons Urban Meyer was so embraced was that the guy didn't lose rivalry games. He just didn't. And I think that was one of the big things that really hurt Will Muschamp, was he didn't seem to do as well in those. Obviously had success against Tennessee, but who hasn't? So I don't know. I think that rivalry game is a big game. And the other reason I say that is, you figure Alabama's probably going to be there in Atlanta. And not to say you ever don't want to have the chance to play in that game, But if it's an either or option, I'd rather think if you're a fan, you want the win over FSU and have that in the bag than potentially not have that and lose to Alabama again. Not that that's a given or anything, but I just think a win over FSU does a lot for the program.
It does for sure. It does for sure. And one more question from the board. Gators win 41 through this at us. What's the floor and what's the ceiling for this team?
Are we talking records or what are we talking here?
Yeah, let's just go record.
I think 7 wins minimum is probably the floor. I just look at Northern Colorado, UAB. Those are gimmies. I think between some of the other teams in the East, you have some tough ones. But I think you can pull out a couple wins there. I don't see this team doing worse than 7-4 or 7-5. Sorry. On the upside, I'm not picking a Florida team to go undefeated in the regular season only because it's happened maybe 3 times. I mean, those types of teams that do that are really, really good, and I think Florida has too many questions defensively to do that.
Yeah,
I don't think the depth is there.
95 and 2009, right? The two.
Yeah, I believe so. So, I think that I think they can win 11 games. I really do. If they are able to win that Michigan game and build some momentum, I would not at all be surprised to see that. Now, I wouldn't pick it, but if we're talking ceiling, I think that this team has the talent where if it catches the breaks injury wise, gets the right balance in a game or two, they can win 11 games.
Yeah, I see it too. I mean, of course, we got to remember all those home games fought against.
And that helps. That helps a lot.
Right. I mean, first team ever. I guess if you really look at it, having 2 West opponents at home, so A&M and LSU having to come to the Swamp, and Tennessee, Florida State as well. So season ticket holders would be happy this year.
Yeah, no doubt. It's going to be a fun slate.
It definitely will for sure. So not as much traveling for you guys either this year.
No, that's okay. I get that. My brother actually lives in Dallas, so that'll be a nice trip for me. I get to go hang out with him a little bit, and definitely looking forward to that game. I mean, the amount of buildup we're going to have before that. I mean, this next month's going to be a really fun ride. For
sure. One more last question for you, Thomas, before I let you go here. Recruiting, you mentioned it on fire lately for the Gators. What do you think sparked it? Was it just Matt Corral committing to the Gators and everything else falling in place? What led up to the exciting Friday Night Lights for the Gators, and how does it move forward?
Well, I think Corral was a huge part of it. Anytime you're able to land a quarterback of that caliber, other guys want to play around them. It's probably part of the reason Florida hasn't been recruiting better to date because they haven't had one on campus that they could point to and say, hey, dude, come let this guy throw passes to you. But I think the other thing is Jim McElwain has surrounded himself with some better recruiters at this point. I think that they've probably tweaked their strategy a little bit to be more, interactive with these recruits on social media, really kind of being part of their lives. And, relationships, that's a real thing. They do take time to build. But I think the staff really targeted Friday Night Lights and trying to build some momentum around that. And I think they did a terrific job.
Yeah, did it seem Friday Night Lights was exciting and pumped up as it was with the early Will Muschamp and Urban Meyer days?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of talent on campus. And, the event itself is, it's cool and all, but it's really more, what they have in terms of the recruits that they're getting on campus, talking to each other and recruiting each other, because that helps as much as anything. It's, like you said, it's about the buzz. And they really did a good job of creating that buzz of, selling to a couple of the key guys that they felt were leaning to them that, hey, let's be the start of something special here. We've got it rolling. We're close. All we need is a little bit more. And they were able to get those guys on board, and then they start recruiting. And I think you saw, a little bit of a snowball effect for Florida in terms of recruiting.
For sure. And we'll see where it goes from here for the Gators and recruiting. It's probably not going to slow. We know the dead period now, but when the season cranks back up, recruiting will crank back up as well, especially with all those home games and getting the recruits in the Swamp. So plenty of visits coming up for the Gators once the season kicks off. So, Thomas, I can't thank you enough for joining us here on Gators Breakdown again, and we'll definitely hit it with fall camp rolling around and the season. Definitely get you back on to help break down these Gators.
Sounds great, man. I really appreciate being on. It's been a fun time. I've enjoyed both times being on with you.
For sure. We'll definitely do it again. So for Thomas, I'm Dave. Thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.